but maybe Kazan had different methods of doing so. Hoplite bumped his chin, enabling his helmet's infrared. Several spots of warmth popped up, each where a member of the squad lay. No extra heat signatures could be seen around the rest stop, but he didn't drop his guard. Kazan might not have a heat signature after all, or he could conceal it. It wouldn't be the first time he'd encountered such a foe. Swagley, the tentacled aliens of the final kind, were capable of it, either through way of advanced tech or some kind of biological capability. He'd make the party aware of this potential danger when they awoke. His eyes then passed over Theopalu's sleeping form again. Rage and disgust filling him once more as he glared at the creature's vile face. He should crush it in his hands, should mangle it beyond repair, should... He shook himself, looking to Twindle once more, trying to determine if he was within her range. 200 paces was what she had said. He calculated the distance, seeing that he and everyone else were well within her given estimate. If he was still being affected by Twindle's magic, then again, why was he feeling this way about Theopalu? If Kazan and Twindle's magic simply cancelled one another out, then there was no real reason for him to feel this intense rancor toward the elf. He racked his mind for a long while, but found nothing that was logical. Could it just be that he simply hated him? And that was that? Can a person really come to despise someone based on nothing but their face? He didn't know. When he had first met Theopalu back in the forward, Hoplite hadn't felt any sort of emotion about the old man one way or another. So why now? Do you understand what I'm saying? Lance asked, drawing him from his thoughts. Normal people need actual sleep. After a moment, he replied, affirmative. 2 more hours should be optimal for recovery. He was glad to turn his thoughts elsewhere. He'd thank Lance for pulling him out of his own head, but showing gratitude for such a thing might lead to uncomfortable questions. He doubted that Lance would like hearing that he'd kill Theopalu, if he had the chance. Lance grimaced at his words. Just let them wake up on their own. Don't disturb them. If you think about it, she continued, tapping her temple, the more rested they are, the longer they can stay in the cart without complaint. She said with emphasis. That was a good point. He grew irritated with the constant complaints they made, as if that would do anything to change their collective situation. Why was it that normal people, no matter what dimension, only seemed to complain? It was unnecessary, and a waste of time. If only they would stop. He paused in his thinking as a realization came over him. He was complaining to himself about other people complaining. Instead of continuing on this train of thought, he told Lance, affirmative. There were other objectives that could be accomplished anyhow. This time could be spent gathering intel from Lance. There had been things that he'd been meaning to ask her. Things that had been put on the back burner for far too long. I have some questions I would like to ask, he said, moving to stand over her. Lance craned her head back, staring flatly up at him as he loomed over her. I am not going to talk to you like this. It's not going to kill you to sit. Hoplite's brow furrowed. It wouldn't kill her to simply look up either. It wasn't physically straining yet. Hoplite found himself lowering himself to the ground, crossing his large metal-clad legs as he finished. The clanging of this motion caused a few of the others to grumble in their sleep, with Ilum yelling, "Keep it down," before rolling over in his bedroll. Shut up, Ilum, Alistair shouted. You shut up, No Horn, Elam shouted back. This hostile interaction between the two confirmed one of two possibilities to Hoplite. 1. Twindle's nullifying aura did not work when she was sleeping. Or 2. Kazan's influence was cancelled out by the active suppression. It was hard to tell, but when Twindle awoke, he'd ask her what she thought. After a bit more grumbling, the two eventually fell back into rest. Lance shook her head and looked back to Hoplite with a sigh. "What did you want to ask me?" she whispered. "Foundation." Hoplite whispered back, "What exactly is it?" Lance drew her lips to a tight line for a moment, leaning back on her palms as she thought. "Foundation is the basis for magic on Akulis. You can't cast anything without it," she said, after a moment. "I heard that it was related to Drowoi," Hoplite said. "Does he control it?" Lance nodded. "Drowoi is the pillar god of Foundation, and the patron deity of all elves. You could say that he is magic," she continued, wiggling her fingers for emphasis. "The three pillar gods beneath him are Kyria, Dandalona, and Fiction, each representing one of the three houses of magic. Fiction represents community, Dandalona represents nature, and Kyria represents force. Is Foundation a raw force, then?" Hoplite asked. "Does it need to be filtered through one of these houses to be useful?" Lance blinked, seemingly surprised, then nodded once more. "That's right. For the most part anyhow. There are some that are able to utilize raw Foundation without building one of the three houses, but it isn't easy and can be extraordinarily dangerous." She gestured with a thumb back toward Alistair's bedroll. "He uses raw Foundation. I saw him do it when we first met them back in the Fallwood, near your pa." "I remember," Hoplite replied. Alistair had conjured some gold-colored fire and had imbued his hammer with it to devastating effect. The fiends that had ambushed them had been turned to little more than soot stains as soon as they came into contact with that golden flame. It had not seemed that the blond man had been in any real danger when using it, and he showed no signs of fatigue after that battle had been won. How dire were the consequences of using raw Foundation, then? "How is it dangerous, though?" he asked. "What will happen in the worst-case scenario?" Lance bit her lip as she thought, a long moment passing before she finally gave him an answer. "Think of a house as a glove," she started, "and you want to retrieve something from the oven. If you use the glove to get your food from the oven, you won't get burned. But if you use your bare hand, well, I'm sure you can imagine. So why use raw Foundation at all? Why take the risk?" Hoplite asked, crossing his arms over his chest plate. It sounded completely and totally unnecessary. Why not mitigate the risk to oneself when casting magic? Why not build one of the three houses to keep yourself safe? There had to be some kind of advantage in eschewing the use of these houses. Otherwise, it would be plain idiotic to go without. The question was, what was this hypothetical advantage? Was magic more potent if used that way? Was it really so much more powerful when used raw, that it was worth the risk of killing oneself? And this was just assuming that there really was an inherent advantage to using Foundation in its base form. If there was no good reason to build a house, then it was a poor and frankly stupid choice to make. Alistair did not seem to be mentally challenged, but perhaps he just hit it well. Then again, Hoplite would not have an easy time identifying a mentally disabled person. The Eighth Arm hardly ever took on such people unless recruitment quotas were not being met. The glove can be tight, and it's restrictive, without much freedom of motion. Lance explained after another moment. You are limited in what you can do inside of the glove. The fingers are trapped, right? But if your hand is uncovered, you can manipulate your hand however you want. So it wasn't as simple as raw foundation being more powerful. Rather, it allowed more options in casting. Still, though, why not simply build the house that was required if that were the case? There still seemed to be no real reason to cast without the houses. Perhaps it was a matter of time. Did the building take a long time to do? Combat situations could be ended in mere seconds if the houses took an inordinate amount of time to use. Then he could understand utilizing raw foundation, even considering the risks. After all, it was doubtful that a mage could build a house if they were cut down before they finished. Yet, he remembered that Elam had also used magic that day, summoning strings of acid that melted whatever it touched. There had been no golden flame in his usage of foundation. Could it be assumed that he had built a house? It hadn't taken any perceivable amount of time for him to do it if that were the case. He would ask the Red Mutant about it after he woke up. Both Elam and Alistair, not to mention Twindle, would likely be more useful to learn about this particular subject from than Lance, who didn't use magic at all. Still, though, she proved surprisingly knowledgeable about this topic. Perhaps she had once desired to be a mage herself and had studied it, so building a house to use foundation is safer. But it restricts what is possible with magic, he said. Lance smiled and nodded. Yes, exactly. Raw foundation can be used to do practically anything, but then you open yourself up to being burnt. I heard that the lucky ones who get scorched by foundation only find that they can't cast as much as they could before. But not many people luck. She said, quoting the word, from what I've heard. Most people become unable to cast at all, or worse. They are immolated by golden fire, with not a trace left of them afterward. Alistair is playing with the most dangerous fire in creation, and what's scary is that he's pretty good at it, from what I've seen. She then held up her hands, palms forward. Keep in mind that I'm no expert. I just have a cousin that's in the field, and I'm just basing my explanation off what she's told me in the past. Affirmative, he said with a nod. What's the point of using foundation raw if it's so dangerous? He asked. I understand that it's less restrictive, but I don't see any real reason to not simply build the house that's required for the spell a mage would want to utilize. Lance hesitated, squinting before finally she said, There are some spells that can only be used with the golden flame, specifically, I think. I'm not sure what spells, but maybe you can ask Alistair about it once he wakes up. I see, Hoplite said. Is there a way to learn it? If he could learn how to use foundation for himself, his capabilities in combat would expand exponentially. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to use magic once he left this dimension, but for his stay here it could prove crucial to his mission. Lance, however, shook her head. You need to have the blood of Zod to call on foundation, and since you're an outworlder, it wouldn't be possible for you to learn it. She told him with a shrug. You're plenty enough dangerous as it is. Seeing you cast magic on top of everything else would probably be overkill. She finished placing a single finger on her chin, seemingly in thought. Overkill indeed. She continued after a moment. Why would I need to have the blood of Zod in order to cast? Hoplite asked. I thought magic came from Dro'owi. It does, Lance confirmed. But life on Arculus was forged from Zod's blood, infused with Drowi's essence, with both gods being guided by Saihara herself in the process. Foundation is present in all those who were born of Akulis, but foundation is only present if Zod's blood is as well. One cannot exist without the other, so you'd need both to cast. It was unfortunate that he would not be able to learn magic, but it was impossible that he had any Akulian DNA. There was no use in lamenting the fact. I see, he said. I have other things I want to ask. I'll try to help you where I can, but I don't know everything, she said. Just keep that in mind. Hoplite nodded, looking over to the sleeping form of Kidka. What is the purpose of the tongues of Zod? He asked. I understand that they want to impress Zod, but is there any other reason besides that? You're really talkative today, Lance said with a grin. Usually, it's negative this or affirmative that. It's a nice change. She continued, using a bad mockery of his usual monotone and deepening her voice for emphasis. He didn't reply, letting the silence stretch on for a long while, until finally Lance tightened her lips. Anyway, she said with a sigh, I'm no expert on the tongues. If you want a better answer, you can wait for Kidka to wake up. Really, I know about as much of them as you do now. Except I don't think you know about the rivalry they have with the Black Talons of Anchoris. Anchoris. He was another one of the Pillar Gods. Hoplite remembered hearing about him before, during his long talk with Manguin at the Death Day celebration. He was a member of the Pillar of Might beneath Zod, the Pillar God of Destruction. The Black Talons and the Tongues, since their founding, always have been enemies. Since the beginning of Dekuma. Lance explained, the Talons are a very abrasive bunch, commonly known for banditry and senseless ruination, as Anchoris desires. They exist to please Anchoris, not impress him, like the Tongues do for Zod. Would they be hostile on sight? Hoplite asked. Lance nodded, her green eyes seeming to gleam with fiery anger. I've had occasional run-ins with them during my tenure as a Watcher, she said, the bitterness in her voice barely contained. Whenever their kind try to come to the Fallwood, it's always for the same purpose. To burn it down. So you've had to neutralize Talons. Hoplite stated. It wasn't a question. There was only one thing a Watcher would do to those trying to burn down their trees. Lance nodded, confirming his suspicion. About 30 of them, give or take over my 200 years serving the Harkhal. Affirmative. Talons would be considered hostile until proven otherwise. Hoplite said, I have another question of more immediate importance to our mission. Lance then sat straighter, staring directly into his helmet as he asked, what is spiraling death exactly? Lance took a deep breath before she began, a slight quaver in her voice to start. It is death, the fate of all those who live, or at least it was. Was? Hoplite asked. Lance's face darkened as she said, it was the path to the afterlife, the path that led lost souls to their worshipped Pillar God. There are 9 heavens and 9 hells, a pair for each god. How did Kazon steal it if it's a pathway? Hoplite asked. I thought it was a curse. It didn't make sense. A path to an afterlife wasn't a physical object that could just be taken by anyone. At least he assumed it wasn't. How was it possible that Kazon got his hands on it? Perhaps through the use of Raw Foundation. Yet, Why would the various pillar gods not stop him from doing this? Were they restricted from interacting with mortals, even if it meant preserving the way their world worked? I'm not sure as to how he did it, Lance admitted. I only know that he took it from the Spiral Queen Lithia, and him doing so corrupted it. Is she another pillar god? He asked. She shook her head. No, she was a mortal. There is currently no god of death in the Pantheon. I have heard it said that the godling war of Decuma will be to determine who will become the pillar god of death. If that's true, then I wonder which of the three pillars that would fall under. She continued, head tilting back as she thought. It wouldn't be might. I don't think. Might's more associated with life and power than death. Anchoris is the pillar god of destruction, he said flatly.